Welcome to TisTalk.
Welcome to TisTalk. This is a podcast coming from Tisbury, Wiltshire and surrounding villages. I'm Julianne Murphy.
And I'm Mary Myers. It's Monday the 3rd of March. Welcome back to TisTalk.
Hello, Mary.
Hello, Julianne. Greetings from Pau.
Yeah, how is Pau these days?
It's good. Yeah, southwest France. I hear that not much is happening in Tisbury, so I'll quickly tell you about the events here. We've had an amazing carnival, and I suppose it's like, the beginning of Lent kind of thing. Obviously, it's not world famous. It's not like Notting Hill Carnival or anything, but it almost deserves to be. The first evening, it's about the bears of the Pyrenees coming out of hibernation and basically attacking the women of the village or of the town, but it's all very transgressive. So the men are dressed up as women, the ordinary women of the place are dressed up as hunters, and they go after the bears, who are men and women in bear costumes, who all have very weird willies, and they come and they run around the town, and me and my friend Francis got attacked by bears. Well, we were, somebody ran after us and
that is very strange.
Waved some weird wooden phalluses at us, and there are these huge marionettes, these huge puppets, like towering over the crowd. And generally lots of music, merrymaking and drunkenness and ignoring of health and safety and burning of effigies and all sorts of things.
And does that last for one day? Is it over 3 days?
Yeah, it's been over this whole weekend. So since Thursday, the 27th, until now. Yeah.
And has that been running since time immemorial, or is it
Well, it's hard to tell. I think it's meant to have been running since time immemorial, and a lot of it's done in the local language called Béarnais, which is Occitan, which sounds very like Spanish, but it's sort of old French sort of thing. But I think it's, the roots of it are sort of lost in mists of time. But it's rather good, yeah.
Well, nothing like that happening in Tisbury, Mary.
I mean, Tisbury Carnival is great, and we probably do better in terms of health and safety, and
maybe taste.
More appropriate for all ages as well.
Yeah.
So that's the news from Pau. Anything happening in Tisbury?
Well, not much. The weather is fab. Really gorgeous, so it feels like spring is here. Of course, before the good weather came, we had a little bit of flooding, but nothing too terrible. You can still get under the bridge. It's just lovely now.
Great.
Nice. The other side of winter, it's great. So what have we got in the programme this week, Mary?
Right, well, we're hoping that listeners aren't going to be listening over breakfast or any meal, because we've got Dr. Kinlin talking about constipation.
Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Kinlin from Fovant Surgery. We've also got Anne Martin reporting from Gaston Manor and about the history of the house. And we have Kiara Holley-Paliano, our lovely teenage reporter, who's sort of starting a series of chats with her friends about climate change and about what her friends think of it, whether they believe in it, and if so, how it's affecting them.
And followed by the what's ons.
Yep, of course. Yeah, we'll end with the what's ons.
Okay. We start with Anne Martin visiting Gaston Manor, the large house opposite the petrol station, to talk to the owners Richard and Anne Beattie about the trials and joys of living in a very, very old house.
Today I'm sitting in the drawing room of Gaston Manor with Richard and Diana Beattie in their wonderful historic house, and I'm here to learn a bit more about the house and who has lived here, and maybe some interesting facts about whether it's haunted or not. So can you tell me a bit, Richard, about the history of the house?
The house was first built as a timber frame farmhouse by the Abbess of Shaftesbury in about 1385, and then it remained in the church until the Reformation. At some point it was stone clad, and they put a new roof on in 1495, which we always call our new roof. It then went to the Arundel estate, and it stayed in the Arundel estate until 1958, when it was finally sold to one of the tenants. During the 19th century, it was, well, for its entire history, it was a farm. It had a couple of hundred acres, which were mainly sold to Beckford in 1819. And then the Turner family farmed it. Ron's still in the village, of course. Then by the time the Second World War came around, it had a rather checkered history of poor occupation, horribly neglected, and by the time we turned up, it was semi-derelict, and as Diana will say, on the buildings at risk register.
Oh my goodness, so you set about rebuilding the house and reconstructing it?
We didn't have to reconstruct it, but the north wing was derelict, and it had no electricity at all, and you couldn't get up the back stairs without taking your life in your hands. And also, we had to have a surveyor who did a very good job and told us that the roof was twisted and sagging. So we had to do a major work in the roof, which is extremely interesting, because when we have a big storm here, you're hardly aware of it in the house. Oh. It's got special baffles that stop very high winds which is a great interest to historic architects.
I can see above the fireplace here some very interesting symbols which look a bit Tudor. Can you tell me something about those?
Well, it's a huge, great single piece of stone which has been put up there as across the top of the fireplace. It's been badly vandalised in the past. Somebody has hacked off a lot of the decoration, but what's left of it is clearly early Tudor, because on one side there is Henry VIII's rose, and on the other side is Catherine of Aragon's pomegranate. So how it got here is a mystery. Likewise, next door to it, there's this mysterious archway which either goes down into cellars which are not in that wing anyway, or goes out into a stair turret which has long disappeared. So the many features of this house are completely beyond understanding.
Do you think it was a secret passage somewhere? Because they used to have passages from old houses to churches and so on, didn't they?
So they say, but I can't quite work out why anybody would bother digging them, but we just don't know.
Oh, gosh.
We were told that by a neighbour when we first came, that this had a passage down to a house on Vicarage Road, but we couldn't find any evidence of it. I'm sure there must have been secret passages, because this is a Catholic village, and there must have been lots of priests, spies interested in hiding in places like this.
Gosh, and you mentioned that sometimes when you're in the garden, you feel a presence.
I can feel a presence, but it's my imagination.
Well,
perhaps it's my hair falling over my face.
Maybe not. And as you walk along Park Road and you look down on the right into your garden, it looks like a very big drop.
Well, the reason for that is that Park Road was built up in the late 19th century to meet the High Street. The High Street's on bedrock, and Park Road didn't exist, nor did the avenue. When they built these things to connect Court Street to the rest of the village, they decided, Lord Margadale presumably, Lord Margadale, decided to raise Park Road to meet the High Street. In the process, he buried the north end of Gaston Manor, and if you walk along Park Road, you can see the drop down into the gardens. At that same time, they built the Victoria Hall. Maybe that was part of the job.
And as you walk up the High Street with your house on the right, there's a rather wonderful gate.
The gate is a war memorial to a chap called Peter Hepplethwaite, who was a navigator, although in those days they called them observers, in a Halifax bomber. He was shot down over Hamburg, and if you look at the gate, you can see his initials, PH, and right at the bottom of the gate, you can see the date, which I think from memory is 1942.
Hey, and can you tell us something about the the trials and tribulations and the joys also of living in a historic house.
I love this house and very much enjoy living here. It is very cold in the winter.
Cool in the summer and freezing cold in the winter.
That's right. So Richard and I go around with our outdoor clothes on most of the time. And it's a big house, but it's lovely as a family, for the family to come, because we've got almost enough beds to have. We're not a big family, but we've got almost enough beds to put everybody up at Christmas. So that is a rather nice asset.
Right, that's lovely. I can see you've got a big open fire here, so you have a roaring fire on winter evenings.
We have more than that. We have 17 radiators, 2 open fires, an Aga and 3 wood-burning stoves. We don't light any of them. We keep warm by running around carrying logs.
That's great. That's really lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
TisTalk, a podcast from Tisbury on tistalk.buzzsprout.com.
Next, we have Dr. Lindsay Kinlin with some advice about a rather sensitive subject, constipation. So, best not to be eating or cooking while you listen to this. Okay, so I'm with Dr. Lindsay Kinlin here at Fovant Surgery. Thanks for talking to us again, Lindsay.
That's fine, yeah.
And we're talking about common symptoms that people come to your surgery with.
Yeah.
And you told me that one of those common symptoms is constipation.
Yeah, so the official definition is the experience of finding stools that are hard and difficult to pass.
Why are poos called stools? Can you just tell us that?
No. I have no idea.
It's a medical term for poo, I suppose.
I think often people are just really embarrassed about using the terminology that they would use at home for something that they're a little bit embarrassed about. So there's quite a few terms in medicine which are given their own special word, and I think it just provides a vocabulary the doctor and the patient can use together, which is just a little bit more official.
Yeah, well, that's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it is a notoriously difficult area to talk about. I think nobody really wants to talk about the bowel habits.
No.
And then, I often joke at parties that I spend about 30% of my working day talking about bowel habits and stools. So, and this is why constipation is such a good topic to talk about. So
Okay.
it's, I'm sure everybody on the planet at some point in their lives are going to get constipation. And if it's a severe constipation episode, it can be absolutely awful. So it's good to understand how to prevent it in the first place, and then how to actively manage it if you do get it in a way that allows you to get back to a normal habit as fast as possible. Because one of the concerns is, certainly in past times, people were very concerned if they weren't passing a stool once a day and got very upset if that wasn't the case, and would become overuse laxatives or use laxatives when they were never needed in the first place.
Okay. If I felt constipated,
Yes.
and came to you, what would be the questions that you'd ask me? What can I expect to have to talk about?
So I think the first thing is to say whether or not you truly are constipated. So the nature of what's a normal frequency to pass a stool goes from anywhere from 3 times a day to twice a week, and all of that is normal. So I think sometimes people do get upset if they haven't passed a stool for a couple of days. But when you do go to the toilet, it's not hard to pass, and you feel relieved afterwards, then you're not actually constipated. It's just the way you're made.
I see. That's normal. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
I've learned something today. Yes.
So that's the first thing, and then you would try and understand what's behind the constipation. So is it a simple issue of the amount of fibre and fluid going into the bowel isn't enough to make a firm, a good stool?
Mm-hmm.
So you need fibre for the bulk of the stool, and my training was that we should pass about a Mars bar size stool with ease, chestnut brown, once a day. So
Right.
that's the ideal.
Okay.
If you can, you're in good shape.
Yeah.
And obviously there's variations in between that. So one of the ways we use to talk about stools is something called the Bristol stool chart. So this gives you 7 different categories of stool consistency, and it's a quick way of being able to explain in a kind of courteous way. So if you're speaking to a colleague about somebody who's got diarrhoea, that would be a Bristol 7. So you're able to quickly convey to somebody what their stool consistency is using this grade system. So 1 is very constipated, like rabbit droppings, all the way through in increasingly soft, right through to liquid stool, which is 7.
Right.
However, constipation would be a hard stool that's difficult to pass, so it might be really painful when you go, and that in turn might cause splitting in the anus, which is a very miserable condition. Might encourage the development of hemorrhoids or piles, again a miserable condition all of its own. So hemorrhoids is the posh name for piles, and I think the way I think of it is they're basically varicose veins of the bum.
Varicose veins of the bum. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're dilated veins in the very lowest part of the rectum, just as just above the sphincter, which is what the anus is. So it's just a little ring of muscle that keeps everything inside.
Yeah. What are the main causes of constipation, and how can we avoid them?
So if it's not food fluid and not drinking enough fluid, not taking enough fibre in your diet, I would say the commonest cause of constipation would be medications, or possibly joint equal would be inactivity. A really fast way of resolving constipation would be to go for a walk every day.
Right.
Yeah. So that just moves everything around. It's really good exercise anyway. And then just attention to medications has been fairly notorious, and stuff that we're quite casual about taking. So for example, even paracetamol that you might take for headaches might be enough to actually slow the bowel down and reduce the muscle activity that squeezes the poo along.
Right.
Yeah.
What about diet?
So diet, as English people, we are absolutely probably notorious worldwide for having a very poor diet in terms of constipation, which is why it's a national obsession of managing constipation. Essentially, if you eat plant-based food, which probably we don't do enough of as a nation, so things like cereals, vegetables, keeping the skins on potatoes, for example, trying not to eat too much processed food, all of these things improve the fibre content in your diet and just create more for the bowel to squeeze against, which makes it easier then to pass the stool.
Right.
Yeah, and then soluble fibre. So this is a type of fibre which is really, really helpful, and that's because it also sucks water into the stool to keep it soft. So the 2 things I think are most useful for this would be apples and oats. So a bowl of porridge in the morning and an apple a day, and that should be enough to keep your fibre content topped up. So,
and the doctor away.
And the doctor away. Yeah, perfect.
So, Lindsay, earlier you mentioned laxatives. Can you just explain what they are and when you would prescribe them?
Of course. So laxatives basically are a group of medications that resolve the constipation by 2 broad functions. You either have medications that make the stool softer, or you have medications which stimulate the wall of the bowel to squeeze and allow you to go more frequently. So understanding the type of constipation someone has then leads to what decision you make about the medication suggestion.
Right.
So softeners, familiar names might be lactulose or magnesium hydroxide, for example. That's quite an old-fashioned remedy. And so they pull water into the bowel and make it softer.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another family of laxatives which are stimulants. So syrup of figs, which would be the oldest fashioned one, or senna, another natural remedy. There's one we use called bisocodal, and there's one that's a mixture of the 2, which is what we tend to prescribe for people who've got very long-standing constipation. For example, if someone is on a painkiller that they can't avoid taking because of their other conditions, what we would recommend in that situation is a sachet of something called Cosmocol.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. So, any final words about how to manage constipation?
I think just to recognise that it's a almost universal experience, and then if you understand why it's happened, then it's eminently treatable or sortable. And my first step would be to ensure that you've got a good fluid intake for the day, and that you've taken some note of what your diet is, just to think, is there a way I could eat more fibre today? Because that will reduce the risk of it.
Great, and keep on eating those prunes.
Prunes, brilliant, yeah.
Okay, great, thanks a lot.
Follow us on Instagram at TisTalk Radio.
Just before the What's Ons, we welcome back 17-year-old Kiara Holley-Paliano, who's talking to her friend Martha about climate change.
I'm here with my friend Martha, who is very interested in wildlife and likes to spend a lot of time outdoors. So, Martha, have you heard of the phrase climate change or climate crisis?
I have, and I still think it's a very apparent issue that despite the efforts that people are going into to help, there still isn't enough awareness about it.
And this lack of awareness, how does that make you feel?
It's very disappointing, I think. I obviously spend a lot of time outdoors. I've grown up around nature, and my dad has taught me a lot about certain aspects of wildlife, especially birds and moths and butterflies. And I'm worried about the fact I might not be able to share that with maybe children I might have one day or future generations, because it simply won't be there to enjoy.
You mentioned interests that you and your dad share. Could you give me an example of how climate change has affected them?
Well, my dad and I really like bird watching on the coast of Norfolk. And on some of the beaches, there are species of ground nesting terns. And the rising sea levels are really affecting them and are putting them in danger.
That's new information to me, and probably would be for most people our age. Why do you think that is?
I don't think there's enough awareness of all of the aspects of climate change. We hear about the birds of paradise on David Attenborough programs that are going extinct. We don't hear about these ones because they are, let's face it, less glamorous, despite the fact that they are much closer to us physically.
This is TisTalk from Tisbury, Wiltshire.
And now the What's Ons with Loud Pointer.
On Tuesday the 4th of March, and with a regular slot every Tuesday to follow, Chair Yoga is on in the Hinton Hall from 11:15 for a 1-hour session. Also on Tuesday at 7 p.m, Tisbury Parish Council meet in the reading room on the High Street. This meeting is open to the public to attend. On Wednesday the 5th at 9:30 a.m, the TisBus outing is to the Otter Garden Centre and Cafe in Wincanton. Further details on the TisBus website www.tisbus.co.uk. At 10:30 until 12 noon on Wednesday, the pop-up cafe will be in the small Hinton Hall, and at 11:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m, the community cafe lunch will be in the Methodist Church. On Thursday the 6th at 5:30 p.m. for 6 p.m, the Tisbury Natural History Society are showing the film Wilding in the Victoria Hall. Also on Thursday evening, and every Thursday starting at 7:30 p.m. until 9:30 p.m, the Tisbury Community Choir will be in the Methodist Church. On Friday the 7th, 7 p.m. for a 7:30 p.m. start, Jesus Christ Superstar will be showing in the Victoria Hall. And on Sunday the 9th at 6:30 for a 7 p.m. start, the Draftsman's Contract will also be showing in the Victoria Hall. And that's all for this week.
That's all from us this week.
So we've been Mary Myers and Julianne Murphy, with special thanks this week to Anne Martin.
We'd love to hear from you. You can contact us on tistalkradio@gmail.com.
You can listen every week to a new episode of TisTalk, and you can find any episode you've missed at tistalk.buzzsprout.com.
You can also find us on Facebook. Just search for TisTalk, that's all one word. And also look out for us on the Nextdoor app.
And now also on Instagram on TisTalk Radio. So do listen in next week for more stories from Tisbury. Bye-bye.
Bye.